This is Breakpoint This Week, a weekly briefing on faith, culture, worldview, and mission with John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview.
Well, welcome to Breakpoint This Week. John Stonestreet here along with Shane Morris. Shane, I think it's fascinating here as we were looking through the stories of the week that on the day where the impeachment trial might end, I mean, that's kind of what we're hearing waking up on Friday morning here as we record our program for the weekend, that the Republican senators have enough votes to not call in any more witnesses, which might lead to a pretty quick acquittal today. We don't know going into today. But, you know, it's just, as I look through the story of the week, it was interesting to me that most of the headlines that were huge, in fact, really all of them, except maybe one that we want to try to get to today, were not out of Washington, D.C. And it just underscores something that we talk a lot about, that culture is much bigger than politics. Chuck Colson used to say that culture's upstream from politics. I don't think that's always the case. Sometimes politics leads culture. Politics is very much a part of culture. I think that's even more true now. But at the same time, most of the stories are happening outside of the political power centers. You might say that the biggest story of the week, and this was really interesting because it's been a while, Shane, since we've had kind of an iconic figure die. And I don't remember one that, you know, when you think about John Lennon, you think about JFK, you can kind of find iconic figures that have died in so many different cultural arenas. I can't remember a sports figure that had this sort of impact culturally. And it might just be because of the new 24-hour news cycle or whatever, but I woke up Sunday morning, try not to check my phone Sundays from Saturday night to Sunday night. It's kind of our Sabbath. I don't always succeed in that. But a friend texted me and said, sad about Kobe Bryant. And that made me break that fast to look and say, what's this about? And, you know, I'm a basketball guy. I'm a huge L.A. Laker fan. Have been for a long time, from before Kobe's days to Magic Johnson. And I know you have no idea whatsoever what I'm talking about.
At this point, my eyes are glazing over. Yeah.
But even you, Shane, saw enough of the kind of the cultural noise that was created by a tragic helicopter crash on Sunday morning with Kobe Bryant. And, of course, escalating this tragedy is his daughter, Gianna, known as Gigi, and a couple other of the players and coaches and families on the girls' basketball team that he was coaching, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, one of the 5 greatest basketball players on the planet coaching girls' basketball upon retirement. But that's what he was doing. Just a really tragic story.
Yeah, the thing that's interested me about this, John, is obviously not the basketball thing. I mean, I got into an argument earlier this week about whether, you know, the death of Michael Jackson or Kobe Bryant was a bigger deal culturally. And obviously, I probably know more about pop music than I do about basketball. But the thing that interests me about this, I think, is how these larger-than-life figures, in Kobe's case, literally, I mean, he's a big guy, they're mortal, just like us. And I think oftentimes we sort of forget that when we see them placed up on a pedestal. And when they die, it is a cultural moment, not just because we've lost this famous person, but because it's a reminder that they're in the same boat as us, that we really are fellow travelers to the grave, as Dickens put it. They're in the same situation. And none of us knows, John, when our time may come. That's the shocking part about death. It reminds me of, you know, the story of, I think it was Julius Caesar who appointed a slave to, you know, sit by his ear during the triumphal marches in Rome and say, remember, thou art mortal. And that's a crucial reminder I think we can pull from moments like this, that we are in the exact same situation, and we don't know if today or, you know, tomorrow is going to be our last day, and we ought to live in light of that.
Well, knowing, you know, your deep disinterest in basketball, in order to kind of have an in-depth conversation about Kobe and his legacy and the role of sports in a Christian worldview, I chose on our Wednesday podcast to go outside of the organization.
And I am eternally grateful for that.
Owen Strand, Dr. Owen Strand, who's a theologian and a fellow hooper. And it was interesting. We had this conversation about sports as idolatry versus sports as character building. And both of us had that experience that we both went through stages where both of those things were true for us when it came to basketball. And Kobe did, I think, as well. And it's interesting that one of the things that has been launched because of his death, and not only his death, but the last several years of his life, really investing into women's basketball, the WNBA, his daughter Gigi's team, and so on, is this hashtag. And you can at least appreciate this hashtag, which is Girl Dad. And the pictures coming out of Kobe with his daughter and the way that he talked about her on a recent interview on Jimmy Kimmel, and it just touched, I think, a lot of us at a completely different level. It certainly did. I'm a girl dad, right? And
and so am
you're
I.
a girl dad.
Yeah, you're talking my language now. I get it.
Yeah, that's really stunning. And of course, coming out of his, let's say, checkered past or questionable past and the accusations, and that's an understatement because of the accusation that was made against him. Serious stuff. And it's been just a hard thing, I think, for a lot of people to navigate. The rape allegations mid-career, an apology, becoming a real champion for women's sports, again, as one of the great male athletes of all time. So it's just a lot to this story. If you go to breakpoint.org and click on Listen there, you can look through our recent podcast episodes, and you can find where Dr. Owen Strand and myself are talking hoops on Breakpoint, which doesn't always happen. We are not the sports center of Christian worldview. Speaking of death and our mortality, Shane, I want to go to two other stories. One of our colleagues, Roberta Rivera, likes to quote someone who said this, and I can't remember who said it. You might remember that really, humans live at the leisure of nature, subject to expiration at any time or something like that.
Without notice, yeah.
Without notice, there we go. We don't know enough about the conditions or, what really happened in that helicopter in L.A., but on the other side of the globe is, of course, a world health crisis that's spreading outside of China. But within China, the number of cases and the number of deaths outside of China is really not, to that epidemic level. And, I often wonder, Shane, I don't know what you think about this. The media can take a story like this and whip it into a frenzy in a hurry.
Right.
But when you talk about the number of people affected and the travel ban that's on 50 million Chinese people right now, this is really an enormous story.
Well, I think, John, we need to distinguish between the very real humanitarian and medical crisis that's going on here and the panic the news media have sort of whipped up over it. Because people are dying, and that's horrific, and that's something that needs to be addressed in the most expedient way possible. But this story, I think, has become larger than life. Now, if in 6 months' time we're either living in the world of I Am Legend or Planet of the Apes, I'll take it all back. But right now, as it stands, you're right. It seems like this is getting blown out of proportion. I'm the resident millennial, so I always have to cite some internet meme that I've encountered over the week. And the one I saw this week was all of the big disease scares of the last 2 decades listed. So it was like anthrax, avian flu, swine flu, SARS, and so on. And there was a date next to each one, and each one had the caption, "We're all going to die." And it seems like each time our collective death seems to get rescheduled. And you know what? I think in all likelihood, the flu, in fact, is going to kill more people this year than coronavirus will. Again, subject to apocalyptic alteration. I think that's probably going to be the case. Flu takes about 50,000 people annually. And that's an interesting study in the way that the media works and sort of gets things hyped up, whether it's this or World War III, so-called, or the Australian fires or what have you.
Yeah, but let me just push back on that just a little bit. I agree in terms of the media, and there's certainly a whole list of the things that we're going to kill everyone. My only hesitation on this to make that statement on the coronavirus at this point is simply because I'm just not sure how much we don't know because of the control of the Chinese media.
Sure.
In other words, the carefully calculated headlines. For example, this statement, our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems, and are ill-prepared to deal with it. Now, that's a quote that comes out of the World Health Organization chief, not China. But you can imagine the control that China has. And there are some videos now that are leaking out claiming to be from on the ground there in that region saying, hey, it's a lot worse than what you're even hearing on the news. Now, I say all that completely being with you that the media, won't let a good crisis go to waste. So I don't want to underestimate that. And I was flying this week, and there's a whole lot of people walking around the airport with masks on.
Right.
And a lot more than what you normally see. And look, if this will cover the sneezes of grown adults who don't cover their mouth when they sneeze, when they fly, sorry, I'm getting to my pet peeve. Either the TSA or grown men not covering their mouth when they cough all over, the plane. There's some good that's coming out of this. But at the same time, it is starting to sink in. I don't want to say the panic, but certainly the real concern is starting to sink in. Well, you're listening to Breakpoint this week. John Stonestreet here along with Shane Morris. Come to breakpoint.org, and you can find information not only on the different stories and resources that we talk about on today's program, but also our upcoming short course. which is on politics and Christianity, preparing for the 2020 election. We've got a wonderful lineup of people who are thinking and writing about this all the time, including Dr. Wayne Grudem, Dr. Bruce Ashford, Mindy Beltz, our friend from World Magazine, and, of course, Dr. Jay Richards walking us through the issues that matter in preparing for the 2020 election. You can find out more by coming to Breakpoint.org. You're listening to Breakpoint This Week. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We invite you to visit Breakpoint.org, and while you're at our website, be sure to browse our online Colson Center store of books and other resources. And you can find links to our social media sites like Facebook and Twitter.
We're back on Breakpoint This Week, and it's a morbid theme for today's program, starting with the news coming out on Sunday with the death of Kobe Bryant, of course, the ongoing concerns surrounding the coronavirus spreading out of China. But of all the memorials of our mortality, if we could call it that, Shane, I don't think anything kind of rises to the level of what Monday was, which was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the infamous death camp from the Nazis in World War II. It's a stunning thing to dig into at any level. My daughters and I, a couple years ago, watched a movie called Life is Beautiful, which is an attempt to take on what it was like to live in one of those death camps and the hope that a father brings a son. Just a stunning movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but my oldest daughter asked to watch it again, so we did on Monday night. Just a stunning film that I recommend enormously. I think we did a Breakpoint commentary. I think I did a Breakpoint on this a couple years ago, Shane, on Holocaust Memorial Day or something like that, to encourage people to watch Life is Beautiful. It was just meaningful in light of, the death of a dad that we saw on Sunday and what this dad was trying to do, and you realize just the impact on the family and the future of the Jews. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to put it into words, but a significant anniversary to remember this week.
I'll tell you what, John, your Breakpoint that aired this week about the anniversary just struck me like a gong. I think that's exactly the right angle, what you took, the banality of evil. Nazism and the Holocaust in particular, among all evils, I think have been cartoonized in our culture. The people perpetrating these unbelievable atrocities against their fellow human beings are no longer human beings to us. They're villainous caricatures of sorts. But there's an enormous danger in that, John, because they weren't cartoons. You talked about Hannah Arendt's idea of the shocking banality of evil. The evil kills people, but you know what? It also has an appreciation for Wagner. It also takes wonderful care of its German Shepherd. It goes bird watching. And there's a reason for that. It's because evil is not out there. It's not in the hearts of some inhuman orcs off somewhere in another world. It's right here in my heart, in your heart. And when we look at the Holocaust, so recent in history, and we say never again, I think we need to understand that the best way to keep that vow is to recognize how much like the men who exterminated 6 million Jews we really are in our nature. We're capable of that. And we can't let ourselves go numb to that fact and treat these people as cartoons, because we're capable of great evil as well.
It sparked that. And again, if people will come to breakpoint.org and click on the link here for this program, we'll add this article to the show notes. But just sometime last week was pointed to an article in which somebody was talking about the problem, and we actually kind of borrowed this for the title of the Breakpoint commentary, the problem of misremembering. I mean, the motto of this day is never again, never forget, and as if the only way to have this happen never again is to never forget. But there's a problem with misremembering, and it was an article that I came across in which someone was saying, there are legends around Auschwitz, like birds wouldn't even fly there. And he said that just wasn't true. I mean, you had, some of the top hired security forces of Auschwitz who, as you put it, went bird watching because there were some unique species only around that camp. And you think there's a real disservice that's done if we kind of talk about Auschwitz as if it happened in a different world or a different reality or a different planet. There's a poignant scene, Shane, in Life is Beautiful in which this takes place, where the main character, who's the father trying to keep his son alive at one of these death camps before he gets taken away, is a waiter, and he has this wonderful relationship with this German doctor, and because they love puns and riddles, and so they each challenge each other with riddles. And, can you figure out this? Can you figure out this? And every time they see each other, there's this really strong relationship. Well, he gets taken to the camp with his son, and the doctor checking on him is this doctor And he ends up waiting tables for him, at this event for German officials. And the German doctor says, I need to talk to you. And, and this man thinks this is going to be his way out. Like, this guy likes him. They're friends. And so they sneak away into a corner of the room. And, while this man's in his kind of, Jewish prison uniform with the star, and the German doctor tells him a riddle and says, help me, I can't figure this one out. And it's just stunning. And it goes to that idea of Hannah Arendt's, banality of evil, that you just kind of thinking, what on earth, could somebody like that be thinking? But isn't that the idea, is that this is stuff that can affect all of us? We all have this incredible propensity of evil, and this, as Chuck Colson would say, an incredible propensity for self-rationalization. It's an important memory, and it's important, as we said, to remember it correctly, not to remember it incorrectly.
Right. And those who perpetuate evil like that oftentimes, I think, will give themselves into that banality because it helps numb their consciences. It helps keep them from recognizing the true horror of what's happening. So yeah, we tend to become callous. And that's the right way to remember the Holocaust. That's the right way to remember Auschwitz, that the Nazis weren't aliens or some other race, that we're more similar to them than we like to imagine. And that is the best way, I think, to keep us from returning to that and keep our vow, never again.
You're listening to Breakpoint This Week. John Stonestreet here along with Shane Morris. Come to breakpoint.org to find the links to all the resources that we mentioned on today's program, and also to learn about our upcoming short course, which starts on Tuesday. There's still just a little bit of time and a little bit of space to sign up for it. We're going to prepare for the 2020 election, talk about politics and Christianity. Again, come to breakpoint.org. You're listening to Breakpoint This Week. We'll be right back.
You can learn more about Breakpoint and the Colson Center for Christian Worldview when you visit breakpoint.org. That's breakpoint.org.
Well, we're back on Breakpoint This Week. John Stonestreet here along with Shane Morris. Shane, one of the things that we have been talking about for several years at the Colson Center on Breakpoint commentaries and in other places as well, and a lot of this has to do with our former colleague Warren Smith, who had a longtime connection with the Boy Scouts of America. But we've been kind of talking about this. Would you call it a long, slow collapse of the Boy Scouts? Is that an accurate way to say it?
Oh, yeah, I'd say it's a long, slow collapse that has accelerated in the last decade.
Well, another news story, from this past week is that they are drawing up plans for bankruptcy. The Boy Scouts of America, I'm quoting here the Wall Street Journal, has drawn up a strategy that aims to protect its local scouting councils and the billions of dollars in assets they hold from sexual abuse claims, according to people familiar with the matter, facing roughly 300 lawsuits alleging sexual misconduct by employees and volunteers. The Boy Scouts are considering a bankruptcy filing covering the national governing body, but excluding 261 local councils. This is an amazing sort of thing. So the Boy Scouts have all of this land, some of which they've mortgaged and done other things to handle issues that they have. Not only do they have an incredibly declining membership, but also, again, as this article said, facing 300 lawsuits alleging sexual abuse claims. Is this survivable? But is one question. But that's not really I want to say that even the interesting thing, the tragic thing is the Boy Scouts of America, we've talked about this a lot, has played a significant role as a mediating structure in American culture. One that as the family collapses, as we have fewer and fewer resources for raising boys into men, the Boy Scouts have been kind of this shining light for years. And you look at the number of CEOs, the number of congressmen, the number of political leaders, policymakers, nonprofit leaders that have been Boy Scouts at one time in their life. And you think, if this thing goes away, it leaves a big gaping hole. And that hole is even bigger as other institutions that have tended to raise young men have kind of fallen to the wayside as well. So the collapse is more than just the collapse. It's more than just the story of a collapse of an organization, that lets girls into a boys' organization, loses distinctions between men and women, although all of that's really important, caves on the, homosexual issue. It's also the story of an organization that's become a mediating structure and what happens in a society in which that mediating structure goes away.
Yeah, I'll take it one step further, John. I think you and I agree that the Boy Scout story is symbolic of a larger crisis in the lives of boys and young men. As a society, I think we've forgotten. We have no idea where these strange creatures we call boys belong. We pathologize them, we medicate them, we shut them in prisons at preposterous rates, and now our culture has deprived them of virtually any place where they can go with other boys and be boys and learn what it means to be a man. The Boy Scouts has been symbolic of that for so long. We just put together a commentary on this. It'll be airing next week, and I think we try to offer some hope there as well, and we point to alternatives for the Boy Scouts and tell parents that, look, it's not just because it's the end of an era with the Boy Scouts doesn't mean that you can't raise your boys right. I mean, there are countercultural ways to be a parent to young boys, and I have two, so it's a keen interest of mine, and I know your son Hunter as well is a little ways away from any potential scouting, but eventually he'll get to that point.
Oh, yeah, but his imagination, I mean, you can already watch his imagination being shaped one direction or another. It's either being shaped as a fighter or a protector. It's either being shaped towards virtue or towards vice. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you had a 2-year-old, right? It's just,
I do.
This is what you see. Yeah, I mean, we actually went to, Great Wolf Lodge this week with the kids. I try to take them. There's one here in town. I take them every year. And, this other little kid was on the thing that he wanted to be on that shoots water, and so he's got this new thing where he pretends to be Buzz Lightyear, and he sticks his forearm out at them and pushes the button and trying to zap them. And you got to talk through, like, okay, well, there's a good time to use the button to zap the bad guys, and there's a bad time when you just want to get your way.
Oh, yeah,
this stuff never stops, right? And
that just makes me want to jump up on my soapbox. We did a point commentary this week about a New Hampshire man who was on a walk through the snow with his family when this rabid coyote suddenly charged and tried to attack his 2-year-old. And this guy, his name was Ian O'Reilly. He grabbed this animal and strangled it with his bare hands to keep it away from his wife and kids. And in the process, he was bitten several times, and now he's got to get, rabies treatments and stuff. And I love what you said on the point, John. There's something about this story that's just right. This father is placing himself between the beast and his loved ones. And in that sense, he's reminiscent of, King Peter from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where he earns his spurs, so to speak, when he kills the wolf to save his sister. This is what being a man means, John. It means having strength and using it for good.
This loss of opportunity, this loss of understanding of what to do with young men, how to raise young men in our society, one of the things that we've talked about for about a year now is not only the deaths from despair that we see spiking, particularly among young men. It's the demographic that's most vulnerable when it comes to a decreasing life expectancy, but also these acts of desperation, whether we're talking about acts of mass violence or, amputating perfectly healthy genitals in a never-ending quest for identity. I mean, all of these things, to me, fall into this category of desperation. And I guess something underscored to me this week, Shane, just how far we've fallen. Like, I saw a headline and I was like, wow, that's great news. And it was the life expectancy went back up in 2018. Now, I grew up when the life expectancy was going up and to the right, significantly. And it was almost even hockey sticking a little bit where, I remember when it was just under 70 and then it just, now we're pushing 80. I mean, that's a steep incline in such a short amount of time until the last 3 years. And for the first time since World War I and the Spanish flu, the life expectancy went down in America for 3 straight years. And we didn't have any war. We didn't have any sort of pandemic like that. We have more, understanding of immunology and healthcare and all of that sort of stuff. And what was leading all this was basically opioid addiction, overdoses, and suicides. And because of our, increased ability to keep people from killing themselves through opioid addictions, our life expectancy went up in 2018 for the first time in 3 years. And
right, but it's not necessarily an improvement in the opioid crisis. It's just that we've got an antidote to keep people from overdosing.
That's right, yeah. In other words, cities are realizing, towns are realizing that they need to spend more money on Narcan. I mean, this isn't an improvement. I mean, so when I saw that, and I was like, oh, that's good news. And then I caught myself saying, the fact that that came across to me as good news means we've got a real problem. And, we're going to continue to see, I think, these two categories of incidents, deaths from despair, increasing suicide, opioids, so on, addictions of various kinds, particularly, again, disproportionately among young men. And then on the other hand, these acts of desperation I think we're going to continue to see it until we solve these sorts of problems. One of the organizations we'll talk about next week is Trail Life USA. And by the way, I think they do a great job. We've met their leadership, been a part of a lot of the things that they're doing, just big fans. And it's a thing that you can bring into your church. So take a look at what they do, Trail Life USA. Again, come to breakpoint.org and we'll link to that organization. But I also want to mention, my friend Pastor Todd Cothran in Charlottesville, Virginia, ran a tremendous program at his former church here in Colorado Springs. I think he does it at his church there in Charlottesville as well. And then also my father-in-law is involved in a program at his church. There's a lot of wonderful programs at local churches that particularly target the relationship between dads and their sons, or that target sons without dads and trying to introduce surrogate dads to their lives. And this is a huge thing for single moms that, listen, only the church can really do that. Only the church can really do that well. And I think that the church is going to have to embrace this part of their calling. We talk a lot about we don't get to choose the time and place that we live in. God chooses it. We live in a time and place where we need substitute dads. And the church is the only one that can actually solve that problem. Come to breakpoint.org, click on the link here for this program, and we'll link you to the various resources that we talked about on today's program, including Trail Life and some of the other really cool organizations that are doing great things that you can bring into your church. Shane, that was a lot of stories, and we didn't get to them all, and we are out of time. But thanks for joining us this week and every week as we talk about the stories of the week from a Christian worldview. For Shane Morris, I'm John Stonestreet. We'll see you next time.